good kitten internet. For once I thought I would actually start with a TLDW, or Too Long Didn't Watch, when it comes to this video. I have been living in Bergen, Norway for slightly over 1 year at this point, and there's a couple of questions about how am I doing and that type of thing, and that I wanted to just give you the short version. Do I regret my decision to move to Bergen, Norway? I made the decision several years ago at this point. The answer is no. I do not regret making that decision. Do I believe that I am better here than I would have been in Madison, Wisconsin? No. Welcome to my 1 year update. Obviously, this is a super complicated subject matter, and very emotional for me, because this has been one hell of a year. But I wanted to talk about it back and forth, and I gave the Too Long Didn't Watch version mostly for family and friends that just want to check up on me, because there's a lot of people that have been talking to me, concerned about me and so on, because I haven't said anything recently. I mean, I haven't posted anything like this since my last Vita? I just abruptly stopped Vita and didn't respond, and yeah. So let's get into some things. So, as a bit of background, around 5 years ago at this point, almost to the day actually, it's like 5 years and a couple of weeks, my partner and I had decided that I would be relocating myself from Madison, Wisconsin to somewhere in Norway. At the time that we weren't sure whether it would be Bergen or Stavanger. Logistics reasons are the reason why we decided on Bergen. I started my plan to go toward that point. So basically, I started reducing some of my things in my house. I started looking up, okay, what all is required. We actually got married, even though we had been engaged for 10 years, we being my partner and I. There's a lot of steps in that process, and I've covered a lot of that in other videos. I'm not going to rehash over them completely or anything like that. The 20th of May in 2023 is when one of the last times in Madison, Wisconsin, and myself, my 2 cats, and the group of friends that I had with me all flew out from the United States to arrive here and live here. Well, not here as in this apartment, it's actually my previous apartment. At the start of that time, I had recorded a series of, it's my first week in Norway, it's my first month in Norway, it's my second month in Norway, videos like that, kind of detailing my general progress. So there's been some negative reactions to that because, believe it or not, I am not a super optimistic person. And my life doesn't always lead toward a movie theater happy ending. Like, a lot of people seem to think that the moment you move to Norway, all of your problems go away. And no, that's not the case. And I knew that coming in. It's not like this was a surprise. There were surprises, mind you. It's not like all of this was as I foretold. But I knew that I was going to have problems. And it's now been a year, actually over a year. Technically, I was back in the United States on my 1 year anniversary, and it's taken me a while to record this. So, what do I mean by I'm okay with the decision and I'm not okay with where I live? I made the decision based off of several factors. One of the major ones being that if I did not move to Norway right there and then, or start the process of moving to Norway right there and then, I never would. There's a few reasons for that, but they basically boil down to physical and mental health and financial situation. I was in a position to be able to do the move. I could afford it. It would be painful, but I could do it. And physically, well, my body's been progressively getting worse. I didn't know how much longer I would be able to do it. If I had decided against moving to Norway, I would always be going through the what-ifs. I mean, I do that now with major decisions in my life that, in my mind, I obviously chose the right choice. For instance, when I had the opportunity to go to grad school and I said no. one of the common scenarios in my mind that I constantly think about is, what if I had actually gone? How different would my life be if I went to grad school at that point? That's why I don't regret making the decision to move to Norway. It's, regardless of how I think things would go and how things actually went, it was the correct decision for me at the time. Now, the rest of it's a different story, and I'm going to need to pick things apart. But first, I want to state the weird, awkward phrasing that I said in the Too Long Didn't Watch. Traditionally, the question is, am I in a better place now than I was a year ago? Or a year and a month in my case. And that doesn't work for multiple reasons. The first of which being that a year and a month ago, I was panicking, trying to get everything ready for a move. Obviously, I'm going to be stressed to hell and back at that point. That was 1 week before my actual arrival. I was, at that point, freaking out about the fact that I didn't have the health certificate for my cats to be able to go to Norway. Okay, then how about earlier than that? Let's say 2 years ago. Well, that doesn't work either. The reason why 2 years ago doesn't work is that that's not a fair comparison. And my cats are going after each other. I think my cats were getting upset about the fact that I was standing up instead of sitting down, because now they have a lap. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, right. It's not a fair comparison to me of 2 years ago, because I'm not me of 2 years ago. The proper comparison is, am I in a better position now than I would be with that one decision where I didn't choose to move to Bergen changed, where instead I had made the decision to stay in Madison, Wisconsin. And you're going to see, when I get through the explanations of various things in detail, why that difference matters. It's also one of the major reasons why this has taken me so long to record. Believe it or not, this is my 13th attempt at recording the 1-year anniversary video. That is how long I have been debating back and forth about how to do this, what to do, what to say. I even wrote up a script twice, and I'm still not reading the script because, why would I learn? Okay, so let's break this up a bit. Let's start with the easy one. Am I better off today than I would have been if I was living in Madison today, financially? No, not even close. Holy crap. No. I lost a lot financially with this move, and it's not something I can easily recover. So let me explain. First off, the move itself cost me a large amount of money, not just in terms of actually getting all of my stuff that you see behind me here over to Bergen, but also the fact that I sold my house, and I had a very low interest rate mortgage. If I were to rebuy that exact same house right now, my interest rate would be a lot higher. It would cost me a lot more, even if I paid the exact same amount of money that I sold it for. There's all of the other expenses with moving here that I didn't have to deal with. So, for an example, having to pay more for various services like the vet. Veterinary care here in Norway is significantly more expensive than veterinary care in Madison, even though I had one of the most expensive vets in the city. It still costs more. There's more to it, though. In moving to Norway, I took a pay cut. I have the same job that I had before, and for my imaginary comparison purposes, I'm assuming I have the same job that I have now. But in my move to Norway, I took a pay cut that's a little actually difficult to explain in terms of percentages because currency conversion rate keeps changing. Since moving to Norway, I have had a raise. The percentage raise that I received is the exact same percentage my previous raise was, which happened right before me moving to Norway. So I can approximate how much money I would be making in Madison today. And I do not make as much money as before, actually not just before I moved, I still don't make the same amount of money as when I started at the company that I currently work for. So I am making at least 11 or 12% less. But the actual numbers depend on the current conversion rate, and currency conversions are complicated, and I'm not going to bother. What I can compare with is how much money I am making versus what my expenses are. And that is fairly easy for me to compare. What I can't do is get the exact level of spending that I would have for various, like, food budget and stuff like that in Madison today, because it's been a year. Prices have gone up, and I don't know if people have noticed, but there is in fact a cost of living crisis going on where prices are going up faster than income. But I can at least approximate it. When I was living in Madison, I was fortunate enough to be able to save a lot more than the average person. There's a mnemonic called 50-30-20, where of your income, 50% go to required expenses, 30% go to optional things, and 20% goes to savings. It's kind of an ideal that's been made for more modern society, because it used to be less than that. And I was fortunate enough to actually be doing 30-20-50, where 30% of my income went to required expenses like housing and utilities and stuff like that. 20% of my income went to optional things like going to restaurants, buying video games, stuff like that. And 50% of my income went straight to savings. As of my raise, I have here in Bergen, I have just recently been able to get to 50-20-30. So 50% of my income going to required expenses, 20% of my income going to optional things, and 30% of my income going to savings. Now, that's not to say that's a bad thing. I am still significantly more fortunate than a lot of people even here. But I'm definitely not doing as well financially as I was before, to put it mildly. My financial situation is fine until I start looking at buying a house. Housing here has gotten very, very, very expensive as of late. I was looking at a place yesterday, actually. Not going out and looking, just looking online. And it was a condo. It was just an apartment in an apartment building. It was a relatively nice apartment building, don't get me wrong. The location was at a transit hub. So it's the what's called transit-oriented development, or a TOD, where you construct residential based off of transit plans, in this case, light rail for Bergen. But this was a 3-bedroom apartment that was, I think it would be about 1,400 square feet, 1,500. It's 120 square meters, whatever that happens to convert to. And its sale price was over $1 million. What? I can't afford things like that. Just saying. I can't afford to live here very easily, at least in places that I want to live. I can afford to live in Bergen in general. These are significantly more expensive than the average places to live in the city, but I have to pay attention to things like transit and so on. Anyway, point is that financially is the most obvious. I am not doing as well living here as I was living in Madison, and that is going to continue getting worse, because while I am assuming that I worked forever at the company that I work for now, and assuming that I received the same raise every year that I received the past 2 years, I will eventually no longer be able to afford here, because expenses are going up faster than my raise amount. That's kind of the problem all throughout the world, really. But I'm a lot closer to that line here than I was in Madison. And that's on top of the fact that I had to spend a lot of money and time and effort to be able to move here. So, yeah, I'm not doing as well financially. Mental health. I am diagnosed with something called severe depression. Technically, I think the diagnosis is major depressive episode severe recurring, or some combination of that soup. Long story short, My brain don't want to work right, and I am sad. That's not actually a good summary, but whatever, it's good enough. While I was living in Madison, I was undergoing mental health treatment, and had been for quite some time. By the time that I was getting ready to start packing, so this would have been September of 2 years ago, I had graduated to not being cured, but technically being in remission. My depression had slowed down significantly. I was still stressed out. I still had all of the anxiety disorders. And yes, that's plural. But my depression had actually slowed down. I was feeling better about things. The last time I saw a mental health therapist, they said that I had been doing well. They saw that I recognized ways of breaking out of my brain's dark patterns and so on. I should be able to handle things until I was able to get mental health services here in Norway. That was the last time I saw a therapist. Because I'm not allowed to see one here. I have gone over this in another video, but the mental health system here in Norway is catastrophically bad. It could be worse. There could be none. But believe me when I say this, it is genuinely worse than the United States. And that's a really, really low bar. Now, to be fair, I was living in Madison, Wisconsin, which has significantly better health outcomes in general compared to the US as a whole. I'll get into that more when it comes to the physical health part. But I am completely ineligible for mental health services here in Norway, as per the sheet of paper that I got from the Norwegian Psychological Institute, or whatever the actual translated name is. The reason for that is because there is so little mental health services available here in Norway. They are so incredibly slammed with need that they have to start rationing care. And I'm not a stranger to rationed healthcare. You may have noticed that I switched genders when I was talking about therapists. That's because my existing therapist back in September of 2 years ago had left practice. And my next therapist, I didn't see them until 6 months later because that's how long of a wait I had. I was expecting a wait of some variety. I was not expecting being told, yeah, you're capable of working, so you're not going to get any mental health. My mental health as of late has gone into a relatively severe decline. I am not doing well. I am worried about me. And usually other people will start noticing mental health issues with me before I do. Nope, this is really obvious to me. I am in major need of help at this point. And I can't get any. Not without having to go to private. Now, technically, private is an option. It is very busy. There's going to be a long wait list. And it costs so much I can't afford it. Not for long term. The prices that I saw for reference are extremely high. We're talking about thousands of US dollars a month for what I was supposed to have. I didn't even have the mental health service that I was prescribed back in Madison. I was technically supposed to have therapy every week, and I got to see my therapist once every other month. Or no, it wasn't once every other month. It was once every 5 weeks. That's right. But still, once every 5 weeks is a lot better than none. And an argument could be made that some of my mental health problems would likely have happened regardless of where I was living. Some of them would probably be from the anguish of making the decision to not be with my partner and living in Madison if I had made that decision. And I'm sure that I would not be in a great state of mind even living in Madison right now. I am so far beyond not a great state of mind that my partner is legitimately worried about me ending myself. I'm not. I am not actually suicidal. But that's the level of concern of what's going on. And I don't see a way out of this. Part of the problem is to deal with language, and I will get to that in a separate section. A lot of that problem has to do with the fact that I'm so far away from almost all of my friends. It's difficult for me. And keep in mind, I knew this was going to happen. Toward the, I guess you would say, early to mid parts of the pandemic, I had recognized that what I was going through in the pandemic, the constant bits of isolation, not being able to leave the house, not being able to talk to people on a regular basis outside of through a video camera like this, that was going to get to me, and that was going to be very similar to the experience I would expect living in Norway. And that has definitely been the case. Now, I can go outside. I can go to a grocery... Well, I can't go to the grocery store today because it's Sunday, and grocery stores in Norway are closed on Sundays. But I could go to a grocery store. I could go to take a walk and go to a park. I can do all of these things. But I can't talk to people. That has a lot of impact on me. And it's a large portion of the reason why a lot of my friends have been trying to reach out as of late, going, "Are you okay?" Because I've been quiet. And it's rough. I don't see an end to this. So on a happier note, physical health. So, as previously mentioned, my comparisons are with a theoretical version of me that stayed in Madison and is of today. So a lot of my physical problems likely would still have happened. Any of the issues with gout, I had already started having gout before I had left Madison. Any of the issues with my other medical conditions would likely still have happened. But there are a couple of mitigating circumstances when it comes to this. One, I likely did more damage to my body during the move and the times that I was living at my previous apartment because of walking up stupid hill. I'm bad at elevation and inclines. I'm a native-born Floridian. The base of Stupid Hill to the top of Stupid Hill is a higher distance than the highest elevation point in the entire state of Florida, and that was nowhere near where I lived. So, to say that I was not used to such things would be an understatement. Now, Madison did have more elevation than Florida. It's still a relatively flat place by comparison to here in Bergen. Everywhere that I've lived is relatively flat compared to here in Bergen, other than maybe when I was living in New Hampshire. You gonna come up, kitty cat? There we go. And a lot of people, when I had mentioned this with previous vlogs and so on, had said something to the effect of, "Oh, it's something you'll get used to, you just need to keep going at it repeatedly." The number of times that I hurt myself walking up that hill is ridiculous. I am very prone to injury. There are problems with me physically that I don't really want to get into in depth on, but long story short, that definitely damaged my body more than if I had been living in Madison. Now, to be fair, I don't expect that to be the significant portion of the reason why my physical health has declined, but it's something that I should note. The other and larger part of the problem is when I moved here, they messed around with my blood pressure medication. So I've been on blood pressure medication for a while now to reduce the ridiculously high blood pressure that I have right now and have had for years. Long story short, my doctor and I finally found a combination of medications that worked well for me. I was able to stay within a relatively normal amount of blood pressure, so my high-end days were just noticeably elevated, but not get your ass to the emergency room levels. And my lower days didn't cause me to start falling asleep or pass out or get disoriented. And that's good. It took a long time to get to that point. We had experimented with a large amount of medication. One of the major concerns that I had when I was moving here was basically, am I going to be able to continue this? My doctor had looked up my medications. All of my medications were legal and prescribed in Norway, although not very frequently. And we thought it would be good. What we didn't look up was the amount that I was being prescribed. So one of my medications was above the legal limit in Norway to be prescribed without... I'm sure there's situations where they were prescribed that much, but it wasn't viable. On top of that, even if it was viable, they didn't actually have medication doses that would work for that quantity, so they would have had to have changed no matter what. And also, they considered an interaction between my medications to be dangerous. So were very reluctant to even give me any at all, never mind the quantity that I was prescribed before. So they reduced my medication, causing my blood pressure to climb, and stay elevated for a period of time. Since then, we have played around even more with my medications. I'm now on 4 blood pressure medications instead of 3, and it has dropped my blood pressure back down below that get your ass to the emergency room levels, but I'm starting to have some issues with too low blood pressure in mornings and so on. So there's still more balancing that needs to be done, and it sucks. Then there's the third thing. And the third thing is not something unique to Norway. I know a lot of people that deal with this in the US. I know a lot of people that deal with this everywhere in the world. This is a global phenomenon. Basically, all of my medical problems are being blamed on the fact that I'm fat. Never mind the fact that I have actual diagnosed medical issues. Never mind the fact that I'm currently looking at it, have an actual MRI of my shoulder indicating that my shoulders are not, in fact, normal-looking shoulders. There are major problems with my body that have absolutely nothing to do with my weight whatsoever. Didn't matter. Absolutely nothing is being done other than, you're fat, you need to lose weight. I did not have this problem with my doctor in Madison. Now, my doctor in Madison was getting ready to leave that practice and go to a different medical provider. So I would not have my doctor that I had back in the day today. So most likely I would have gone through something somewhat similar. And I did go through that when it came to other doctors in Madison, like the specialist that I saw that didn't bother looking at my chart and just immediately blamed the fact that I'm obviously diabetic on my problems when I actually have no sign of diabetes whatsoever. Because I'm fat, and she just assumed that, oh, fat person, that means you have type 2 diabetes. I get really angry about that type of thing, but I have gone through multiple doctors here in Norway. Hopefully my current doctor, which I have now seen all of once, is going to be better than the previous ones that I've had. But I got the distinct feeling they did not care about me as a human being. As a result, my physical health has declined, and I believe that it has declined more so than it would have if I was still living in Madison. Maybe not by a huge amount. This is a little more type of thing. But I don't see any signs that my health would have gotten worse by living in Madison. That's kind of the thing. Some of these things that have happened to me over the past year would have happened anyway. I still would have been twisting my ankles, maybe not quite as often as I do right now, but it would still be happening. I would still be having problems bending over because my back is screaming at me. Those things would not have gone away. But I'm not seeing anything that's better as a result of me living here in Norway. Now, I can already hear screaming going on about the fact that I dared to criticize the Norwegian medical system over the US system. So let me be blunt. I lived in one of the best areas in the United States for medical care. I had been paying out of my own pocket, which, yes, that was included in those financial numbers, a very high premium to have what was basically the best medical care I could possibly afford. And yes, I am under no illusions that if something were to go horribly wrong, my medical provider would drop me like a rock. That is not to say that the US system is good. The US system is awful. My medical provider probably wouldn't have dropped me like a rock because they're a co-op, but still, I am comparing between my experience in the US and my experience here. And my experience here has been awful. And for reasons that I had not anticipated whatsoever. That's probably a good summary of my experience here in Norway. It hasn't been entirely awful in every way, but definitely in ways that I was not expecting. So, let's start talking about some of those other ways. Language. This was something that I was afraid of, for reference. It's not a complete secret that I was dreading the fact that I needed to learn Norwegian. And I do need to learn Norwegian. I have taken a formal class on Norwegian. At the end of the class, that's supposed to put me at the A1 level. For those that are not familiar with standardized language levels, think of it as I've taken 2 years of high school Spanish, but in Norwegian. That's roughly the level of Norwegian that I would be at the end of the course. I think I was probably a little bit worse than that in most ways, and a little bit better in a couple of other ways. So when people ask, I say I'm approximately A1 level, except I'm not. When I was taking those language courses, I started noticing that I was having mental health issues. And part of the reason why is the way my brain works when it comes to work. I've had this type of thing happen before, but basically my brain was saying that I was working for 2 hours learning Norwegian, and then having to work a full 8-hour day at work afterward. So my brain was saying, you're working 10-hour days right now, what is wrong with you? No, stop, and starting to amplify my anxiety, stress out, and so on. So I actually had taken time off of work, basically taking half days, so I would have 2 hours of Norwegian, a 2-hour break, and then a 4-hour workday. That worked better, but I should have noticed things not quite working right there. Because as it turns out, I have major issues with Norwegian. And I don't mean I'm offended by the language, although there are definitely stupid things about Norwegian that drive me up the wall. Keep in mind, I'm an English speaker. I'm familiar with stupid decisions based off of historical precedent when it comes to languages. No, what I'm referring to is me trying to interact with other people in Norwegian. While I was taking courses, my partner creator had asked me if I wanted them to start speaking Norwegian at home with me. And my answer was an immediate hell no. And I am aware that it would be easier for me to learn and grok Norwegian if I was using it more often. But I was afraid of what actually ends up happening, which is that my brain locks up when I try to translate Norwegian. I'll give you an example. Last week, I had to take my cats to the vet. It was a routine appointment. The first time that they had been to a vet in Norway, but it was a routine appointment. There wasn't anything major going on. They would get some shots, talk to the vet, and that's it. And initially, the vet was speaking Norwegian, which is expected. I'm not expecting people to speak English for me only, because they need to communicate ideas across, and it's better for them to communicate ideas across in their native language. And my partner creator was there. And the vet would say something in Norwegian. And I would pick up on a few words. It's not like I'm completely incapable of understanding Norwegian. But my brain would start trying to parse the rest of the sentence. In English, this is the way that I understand what somebody says, because I have some issues processing what people say. My brain will pick out certain words, assemble the sentence, then go back through the sentence to make sure it makes sense before I go, oh, that must be what they said. If not, I'll occasionally go, wait, what did you say? And as I'm saying that, my brain finishes processing what they just said. A lot of people have this happen. This is not exactly uncommon. But in Norwegian, I have an extra step of translation. So what ends up happening is that I'll pick out a few words of what they said, understand what those words mean, try to start figuring out the rest of the sentence by translating, and at the same time, they're saying another sentence. My translation stops at that point. I pick out more words of what they're saying, and before I even get to translation, they're saying a third sentence, because this is a conversation going back and forth. Either the vet's saying something or my partner's saying something, and I'm being asked questions all of a sudden, and I haven't finished even picking up off of the words that I would understand from 3 sentences ago by that point. Not only can I not understand what the question was, even when my partner would translate it into English for me, I'm still processing what was going on earlier, so I don't understand what my partner says in English, for that matter. My brain effectively locks up when this happens, and I get incredibly frustrated about this, because all of a sudden I can't think. I can't act. I can't do anything. And this keeps happening. Effectively, every conversation that I am tangentially involved with Norwegian, this happens. It didn't used to happen. In fact, before I had taken the course, I would just hear Norwegian and go, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you said. Can you repeat that in English? And it was fine. I wished that I understood what they were saying, and I would pick up a few things. I've been able to read a lot of things. Like, for instance, I can go to a grocery store without having to use a translator and that type of thing. And I've been able to do that for a long time now. But ever since starting to learn Norwegian, my brain starts trying to process it and fails miserably. I've always known that I'm not very good when it comes to languages. There's a famous story about me. This was while I was in college. I was taking a class that had taken me to Vienna, as in Austria, and we had a crash course in German before. I knew enough to be able to say yes, no, water, that type of thing. And I had been at an art museum. I had grabbed my backpack out of the storage area and was going to head back to the cafe, waiting for the rest of my companions in the class. And the art museum person, curator, there's a term for it, my brain's fried, was stopping me and trying to say that I wasn't allowed to take my backpack into the museum, which I wasn't trying to, I was just going to the cafe. So I was trying to get that across, didn't quite understand enough German to get it across, and asked her if she understood English. She had said no, she didn't understand English, so I tried to change to German, ended up changing to Spanish instead, then apologized in Japanese and walked away. That's the way my brain handles languages. It shoves them all into one box and just goes, here, go have fun. And that's not a great way to... It's a decent way to try to figure out, oh, that's what that word means. That word means this. It's not a good way to actually be able to speak and grok the language itself. On top of that, you have the fact that the Norwegian language lessons that I've been taking have been the wrong dialect. And the wrong written language on top of it. So, Oslo is the capital of Norway, and it is the home of the majority of the population of the country of Norway, which means that the majority of the population of Norway speak a dialect of Norwegian that's local to Oslo. I live in Bergen, so I live on the opposite side of the country. Norwegian is not really one language. It is 4 languages in a trench coat. The dialectal differences in various types of Norwegian are larger than the dialectal differences between, say... Well, here's actually a good example. The equivalent of what I learned in Norwegian is like trying to learn English by taking a course that teaches you RP, or Royal Pronunciation of English, as in what they would teach in fancier schools in England, and then trying to understand what the locals in Louisiana are saying. No, that doesn't work. Like, oh, my brain does not handle this. And on top of it, it's a separate written language. Like, the spellings are completely different for some words. The pronunciations are completely different. I do not hear what people are saying. I do not have the ability to hear something and then spell it in Norwegian as a result. Because even if I had learned all of that from my Norwegian, from my courses that I've been taking, that's the Oslo dialect, not the Bergen dialect. There's both a different pronunciation and a different spelling. All of this, so instead of it just being I'm listening and I'm translating, it is I'm listening, I'm trying to figure out what they just said, I am trying to convert it from Bergen dialect to Oslo dialect. Then I'm trying to translate it, and then trying to figure out you can understand how I'm hiccuping when I'm trying to understand what people say. Sure, I can read a sign. I can do anything that I do on my own pace. It's not too hard for me to do that. But that means that I can't socialize with people. At all. Unless if it's in English. And people, of course, a native speaker doesn't want to socialize in a language they're not native to. It's going to be a lot easier for them to socialize in their native language. Long story short, I have 3 friends in this country, and one of them is my partner. I don't even think I say a sentence a day, or maybe even not even a sentence a week to other people in Norwegian. My only ability with Norwegian where my brain doesn't lock up is for interactions that I have memorized. So, for instance, going to a grocery store, I am asked whether I would like a bag, I am asked whether I would like the receipt. I know what I'm going to be asked in advance, I know exactly what they're saying. Minor modifications off of that script is fine. Anything more major than that, my brain freezes. This is awful. I cannot stand dealing with this. It's driving me up the wall. It is one of my biggest problems with living here. And I want to learn Norwegian. I want to be able to speak my partner's native language. I want to be able to just go to the farmer's market that's out there today and be able to pick up an onion and ask, how much is this onion? And be able to hear the reply and understand what they just said. I cannot do that right now. I can read the sign. I can see what it says. I know how much it would cost based off of reading the sign. This is awful. This is a terrible experience for me. Which rolls into culture of Norway. I knew that I would be affected by a culture shock. That's going to happen. I knew it wouldn't be as nasty of a culture shock as if it had been if I had moved to a country that I had never visited. I mean, I've been to Norway many times prior to moving here. Probably about a dozen or more. I think I figured out I had basically been, at this point, I have lived in Norway for about as long as I had visited Norway prior. So, probably visited a total of about 52 weeks throughout the 20 years prior. And at this point, I have lived here for a year. You get the idea. So, the cultural differences between Norway and the US weren't surprises for me. I knew in advance that Norwegian culture tends to be a lot more insular than Midwest American culture, where you walk along the road and you see somebody driving by and you wave hi and they might honk back to greet you and that type of thing, even though you're complete strangers, and you would smile the entire time. That is American Midwest culture. I knew that I was not walking into American Midwest culture. And I had already had experiences about things that I need to change. For instance, I need to drop my volume whenever I'm speaking, because otherwise I sound like the stereotypical loud American. Especially when my ears are clogged and I can't hear the volume that I'm at. I know that is a constant problem for me. I know, for instance, that you don't ask about, oh, what do you do for a living? That type of thing. That's not a normal question in Norwegian culture. You ask, what do you do with your time? Because you are not your job, which honestly is probably a good thing to ask in the US anyway. Just things like that. So, the actual reality of moving here has hit a bit different. First off, I knew coming here that Norway was one of the less immigrant-friendly places to move to. I was completely unaware of just how immigrant-unfriendly it is. And part of that is because the whole of Europe has become significantly more immigrant-unfriendly. If anything, Norway has probably not become more anti-immigrant as much as, or at least in comparison to the rest of Europe. But there are specific things that the country does to make things more difficult. Great example. I had been speaking with my specialist doctor, cardiologist here in Norway, and my cardiologist is fully fluent in English, had no problems with using English instead of Norwegian when talking with me, and she had even mentioned, okay, how would you like me to contact you in the future? Do you want me to give you a call? Do you want me to update your medical thing? And I was like, well, I'm updating the medical thing's probably fine. I'm okay either way. Why do you ask? Turns out that she is not allowed to write messages to me in English. What? Mind you, native speaker on my part, not native but close enough to native level of understanding on her part. I'm not asking for my medical records to be in English. I'm not even asking to only have English present in the message. I have no problems with it being in both Norwegian and English. If it's in Norwegian, I'll have to just translate it, but it's on my own time. That's less of a problem. No, she is not allowed to communicate with me in any written form in English. Must be in Norwegian. Like, I am far from the only immigrant in Bergen. I am far from the only immigrant in Norway in general. I can understand not wanting to communicate with a patient in a language that you are not familiar with. But this is a language that both of us are fluent in, and she was not allowed to talk with me in it. There are a lot of laws in Norway, either pre-existing laws that were just not enforced until more modern era, or laws that have been enforced the entire time and they've just never removed them, that make this place rather hostile toward foreigners, or anybody who is non-native. A great example that I had brought up way back at the start of the series was the whole, in order for me to get an apartment, I needed a bank account. In order for me to get a bank account, I needed a permanent address. In order to get any form of identification, I needed a bank account for that matter. In order to get a bank account, I needed a permanent address. In order to get that permanent address, I needed to be able to rent an apartment. In order to rent an apartment, I needed a bank account. In order to get paid here in Norway, I need a bank account. In order to be able to get a bank account, I need a permanent address. In order to get the permanent address, I need to be able to rent an apartment. In order to be able to rent an apartment, I need to be able to get paid. None of these are problems for Norwegian residents because they've been registered in the system since they were kids, if not since birth. For somebody entering the system, it's like, of course this is a problem. Why are you thinking this isn't a problem? Like, the entire concept boggles my mind still. The entire country seems to be set up this way. And I'm not asking Norway to start speaking English everywhere or anything like that. What I am asking is for things that I've seen in other places. For an example, when there is a major bus change in Madison, you will frequently see flyers in the buses that are basically like, hey, look, new maps are coming. Hey, here's the new schedule. Let us know if you have any problems, that type of thing. And they're in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Hmong, because there's a relatively large Vietnamese population in Madison. There's no legal requirement for them to print it in Hmong, or Spanish for that matter. And the percentage of the population that understand Hmong in Madison is much, much smaller than the population of Bergensers that do not understand Norwegian and do understand English, or probably even Polish or several other languages. It's a relatively small population in Madison, but they do it anyway because it's the right thing to make people feel more comfortable and more welcomed. I do not feel welcome here. It's better now that I've moved to this apartment than my previous apartment where I was feeling actively hostile, or where the feelings of the people around me were much more actively hostile. I don't view the area that I live in as actively hostile to my existence. I just view it as apathetic at best and generally uncomfortable, usually. But I was already starting to get the same type of feeling in Madison. The reason for those feelings in Madison had to do with cultural differences between the Madison standard and me. For a great example, transit. I don't drive. I have driven before, as in I have taken lessons, I had a learner's permit, I went through all of that. I've never had a license, but I have been behind the wheel, I have driven back and forth. I know how to drive. And my whole reason why I wanted to do that was to at least get to the point of somebody has a medical emergency, I can drive them to the emergency room. And that is my level of driving knowledge right now. Here in Bergen, that doesn't matter. I can get everywhere in the city without being able to drive, and it's perfectly fine. It was more annoying at my previous apartment because of Stupid Hill, but I don't have any problems here now. I frequently go out and about, and I don't even think about the fact that I'm going to be going on 3 different buses, or a bus and a tram, or whatever. In Madison, on the other hand, they had recently announced that they were redoing the bus system to add in bus rapid transit, which is nice, but the bus rapid transit was only along, 2 roads in the city, basically? And as a result of them revamping the system, they changed all of the bus lines to make it much more difficult for me to get anywhere from my apartment. In fact, outside of a long walk effectively under a major highway and alongside another highway, there was not a way for me to get to a grocery store on a bus line without staying on the bus way beyond any of the close-by grocery stores. I think I would actually be almost downtown by the time I would be by a grocery store. The area that I was living in was having its public transit withdrawn from it. And the excuse that they were giving was basically, there aren't as many people using the buses in this area. We want to concentrate on the areas that people actually use the buses. This is what I mean by I wasn't feeling welcomed in Madison, because the area was shifting around me. I no longer had an easy walk to any restaurants. I had 3 restaurants within a very short walk when I had first moved to my house. By the time I moved out, there were none left. I had an easy bus ride to go to multiple grocery stores, depending on which direction I wanted to go, either just a couple of stops in one direction or a couple more in the other direction. Now I don't. Well, the changes actually happened after I moved, but if I was living there now, I would not have that be the case. If I wanted to go anywhere, like for instance, my doctor's appointment, in order to go to the doctor's appointment, I would have up to an hour-and-a-half bus ride. And this was prior to the changes. After the changes, I think it's significantly longer. Or I could walk for an hour and 25 minutes. So I frequently opted to just walk because it was faster. Here, the walk would be 3 to 3.5 hours, and the transit is more like 45 minutes. And that's only because of the stupid everybody is slammed and there's waiting lists for everybody problems that I've already talked about the Norwegian medical system. But point is, I don't fit culturally in with Madison either. At least not the area of Madison that I lived in. And I was already feeling the pressure constantly. My neighbors complaining about the fact that I wouldn't mow the lawn. I had somebody report me to the city of Madison for having an unmowed lawn, even though the regulations, I was still within regulations technically, with the height of the lawn. And I do not care about lawns. Freaking hell, I would rather have my entire yard being wildflowers and trees and useful things. I did not match the cultural of the area of Madison that I lived in. Just like I do not match the cultural elements here in Bergen, in the area of Bergen that I live. I match them in this area better than my previous area, but I still don't match them. Having said that, I can explain the differences in English. I can't explain the differences in Norwegian. I am definitely worse off here than I was back in Madison. But that brings up something that I'm much better off when it comes to living here versus living in Madison, which is freedom. I have the ability, I'm specifically referring to freedom of travel. I can travel to where I want to here. If I wanted to right now, I could start on my way to go visit Creator in their cabin. They're currently at the cabin, or not home at the moment. I could do that on my own power. I would have a long walk, but I could do it. I could go to IKEA, which is on the exact opposite side of Bergen from me. I could go to the airport. In fact, I could walk to the airport, but if I didn't want to walk to the airport, I could take a bus to the airport. A bus. One. I might need to transfer at a point to go on the tram for one stop. But point is, it's easy for me to get anywhere in the city, actually. Because the city, while it wasn't built for public transit, because the city itself was not built for anything, they've kind of oriented their growth based off of being able to access things in public transit. I just mentioned how Madison just withdrew a good chunk of their public transit and made things worse for the areas outside of the core of Madison. And if I was still living in Madison today, there's a very good chance I would have sold my house and tried to buy something in a better location transit-wise. And even then, I would still have problems. Great example of this. In Madison, whenever I needed to fly out of the Madison airport, which was not close to where I lived, but at least in city limits, I would need to take a cab because it would be before the buses started running. I almost always had first thing in the morning flights. The last time I flew out of the Madison airport, before I moved, I had a flight at like 5:45 in the morning or 6 in the morning, something like that, on a Saturday. And I had attempted to request a cab for it and couldn't. There were no cabs available to be booked. Mind you, I was trying to book it 3 or 4 days in advance. There were nothing available. There was no guarantee there would be any cab service whatsoever on that morning from anywhere in the city. This wasn't it's super busy and we can't handle it. No, it was just, we don't have drivers. Madison was down to 2 cab companies in the entire city. All the rest had been bankrupted or driven under or acquired and shut down and so on. And before somebody asks, Lyft and Uber are not reliable for such things either, because those services had already been winding down a bit in Madison. Plus, you can never guarantee if they're actually around at 4:45 in the morning on a Saturday. Here, on the other hand, there's like 9 or 10 different cab companies. All of them are available 24 hours. I have a lot more freedom here than I ever had in Madison. Just get up and decide, I'm going to go to an electronics store and buy a laptop. I could not do that in Madison. There was, Best Buy was the only electronics store chain at all. And even then, they didn't have the types of things that I was looking for. Whereas I have 8 or 9 different places I could buy a laptop within a short bus ride of where I live right now. If I look at things objectively, ignore the fact that my partner is living here with me, and pretend that I can teleport my partner, myself, my cats, and all my things anywhere that's possible for me to live, which right now would be the country of Norway and the country of the United States. Where would I live right now? I don't have an answer to. When I had started this move, I had decided that I would give myself 1 year. Unless if something catastrophically bad was going to happen, which I didn't expect, I would live here for a minimum of 1 year before I would even think about, is this a good idea? It has been 1 year at this point, and I have pushed that timeline back further to make that decision. I am going to make that decision at the end of this year. Mostly because of the presidential election in the United States, because I will not be welcomed back to the United States if Donald Trump were to win the election, and partially because, I have a lease here for a year minimum, so I would have to live here until the end of the year no matter what. I honestly don't know what my answer is going to be at the end of that time. Whether I stay here or move back to the US. And that scares me. I have put so much time and effort into living here. And I have gained so much. I have the ability to hug my partner whenever I want. You have to understand, my partner and I have been together for over 20 years. And only been able to live together for 1. That is ridiculous for a long-distance relationship. And I don't want to give that up. I want to stay with my partner. I want to be able to give them hugs. I want to be able to, watch anime on the couch together, which is what we've been doing for the past couple of weeks. I just want to be able to feel that again. But I'm starting to wonder if I'm starting to hit that point where my life is at risk by living here. I'm not being treated appropriately medically. I have no doubt in my mind that I have shaved time off of my life by living here compared to living back in the US. And I don't know if I should stay here. If I was able to live anywhere, ignoring the fact that my partner wants to stay here, just pretending that that was not a concern, and ignoring the actual costs of moving back and forth, I would probably not be living here. I don't know where I would be living, but it probably wouldn't be here. If I understood Norwegian better, or was fluent, I should say, I don't think I would have the same problems as I do today. I'd be able to advocate better for myself. I'd be able to actually challenge things when it comes to medical doctors deciding blatantly dumbass crap. I would be able to feel better about myself because I'd be able to speak up for myself. But I also don't have the ability to get to fluency. I'm supposed to be at A2 level by the end of 3 years here. I am at 1 year and I am roughly at A1 level. I don't have any doubts that I could make it to A2 level and pass an A2 exam within 2 years of now, if I took enough time off. Can I do that while working? No. No, I don't think I can. Can I maintain it? I don't know. Right now, this is awful. Living here has been painful for me. We are starting to approach, this is probably one of the worst times of my life. And it's sad. I'm actually with my partner finally. I've achieved my dream of being able to live with my partner and have a house with 2 cats. And I'm very unhappy. But I also don't think I would have been happy if I was living in Madison. I don't know the answer. I don't even know why I'm recording all of this, to be honest. This is like an hour-ish long blabber of me going, I'm unhappy. Yeah, my year update is that I am miserable. And have been miserable for quite some time. I'm glad that I made the decision that I did, because otherwise I would constantly obsess over the idea of what if I had moved to Norway. But I'm not happy with the results. I don't think I have anything else. I'll talk to you next time, Internet.